History taught us that these men went mad, that they drank too much, that they were eccentric geniuses who simply lost control. But what if history lied? Behind some of the most powerful minds and legendary names the world still celebrates today, there was a silent killer slowly eating away at their brains while everyone around them chose to look the other way. Not bullets, not prison, not scandal. A disease. Syphilis was once a death sentence disguised as shame. It didn't strike the poor first, it devastated the elite. Politicians, artists, gangsters, visionaries, and when symptoms appeared, paranoia, hallucinations, memory loss, society called it madness instead of medicine. In this video, we're uncovering the truth history buried. 5 legendary figures whose lives didn't end in mystery or moral failure, but in medical silence. And once you see how their stories really ended, you'll never look at genius, insanity, or legacy the same way again. Number 1. Howard Hughes. When a genius became a prisoner of his own mind. Howard Hughes was once the embodiment of American brilliance. He was a billionaire industrialist, a Hollywood mogul, an aviation pioneer, and a man obsessed with pushing human limits. At his peak, Hughes seemed unstoppable, flying experimental aircraft, producing hit films, and reshaping entire industries. Then, slowly, something began to unravel. Hughes retreated from public life. At first, people called it eccentricity, then paranoia. He locked himself in darkened hotel rooms, avoided human contact, and developed extreme obsessions with cleanliness and contamination. He hoarded tissues, repeated rituals compulsively, and trusted fewer and fewer people. For decades, the official narrative framed Hughes as a brilliant man driven mad by success, trauma, and excess. But modern historians and physicians see something else. His symptoms, paranoia, hallucinations, cognitive decline, personality changes closely align with late-stage neurosyphilis. At the time, admitting such a diagnosis would have destroyed reputations. Doctors were paid to stay silent. Associates were rewarded for obedience. Hughes had access to every luxury imaginable except honest medical truth. By the end of his life, the man who once controlled empires could barely control his own thoughts. His genius didn't vanish overnight. It decayed, quietly, invisibly, and history chose to call it madness instead of disease. Howard Hughes didn't disappear because he lost his mind. He disappeared because no one was willing to name what was killing it. Number 2. Al Capone, the kingpin no one could defeat. Al Capone ruled Chicago through fear. Guns couldn't stop him, rival gangs couldn't touch him, politicians bent to his will. Law enforcement failed again and again. Yet the man who dominated an entire city was eventually defeated not by bullets or prison bars, but by a microscopic bacterium. Capone contracted syphilis as a young man and ignored it. For years, he appeared unstoppable. But by the time he was imprisoned for tax evasion in the early 1932, the disease had entered its most devastating stage. Neurosyphilis attacked his brain. Prison doctors observed alarming changes. Capone became confused, paranoid, and childlike. His once razor-sharp intelligence deteriorated rapidly. By the time he was released, his mental capacity had declined to that of a young adolescent. The most feared gangster in America spent his final years wandering his estate, unable to recognize former allies or follow conversations. The empire he built collapsed not because of justice, but because his mind had been quietly destroyed from within. Capone's story terrifies historians because it exposes a brutal truth. Power offers no immunity. A disease ignored long enough will eventually humble even the most untouchable men. Number 3. John Barrymore. When talent was mistaken for self-destruction, John Barrymore was considered the greatest stage actor of his generation. His Shakespearean performances were legendary. Critics called him the Great Profile. Audiences watched in awe as he commanded the stage with elegance and emotional depth. Then came the decline. Barrymore began forgetting lines mid-performance. He stumbled on stage. He appeared disoriented, erratic, and emotionally unstable. Hollywood blamed alcohol. The public labeled him a tragic drunk, a gifted man who destroyed himself. But the symptoms didn't fully match alcoholism alone. Friends and physicians privately suspected something more severe: progressive memory loss, mood swings, cognitive impairment, all signs consistent with neurosyphilis. At the time, acknowledging such a diagnosis would have been unthinkable. Studios covered it up. Family members stayed silent. Alcohol became the convenient explanation, socially acceptable, morally tidy. Barrymore died disgraced, remembered as a cautionary tale of excess rather than a victim of untreated illness. His legacy was rewritten to protect the image of Hollywood itself. History didn't remember the disease. It remembered the lie that was easier to swallow. Number 4. Oscar Wilde. A mind broken by silence and shame. Oscar Wilde was one of the sharpest intellects of the 19th century. His wit, satire, and insight cut through Victorian hypocrisy with surgical precision. But society eventually turned on him. After imprisonment and public humiliation, Wilde lived in exile, physically weakened and mentally exhausted. Official accounts cite meningitis as his cause of death. But modern analysis paints a darker picture. Wilde suffered from neurological symptoms, chronic pain, and mental decline consistent with late-stage syphilis, a disease rampant in Europe at the time but shrouded in stigma. Whether contracted years earlier or worsened by prison conditions, the signs were there. What makes Wilde's case especially tragic is the context. He lived in an era that punished deviation and hid illness behind moral judgment. To admit he was sick would have compounded his disgrace. Silence was enforced by shame. Wilde died poor, sick, and abandoned. His brilliance dimmed not by lack of talent, but by a society that preferred scandal over compassion. His life reminds us that genius does not protect against cruelty, especially when illness becomes taboo. Number 5. Edgar Allan Poe, the most haunting death of all. Edgar Allan Poe's death remains one of history's great mysteries. Found delirious on the streets of Baltimore, wearing someone else's clothes, Poe was hallucinating, incoherent, and terrified. He died days later, calling out names no one recognized. For generations, theories flourished: alcohol poisoning, rabies, violence, political kidnapping. But none fully explain the symptoms documented by doctors at the time. Poe suffered from paranoia, delusions, confusion, and extreme sensitivity to alcohol symptoms that align disturbingly well with neurosyphilis. Medical records from the era were vague, and stigma prevented open diagnosis. What makes Poe's story chilling is how closely it mirrors his work. Madness, disorientation, the collapse of reason. He didn't just write about psychological horror, he may have lived inside it. If syphilis was indeed the cause, then Poe wasn't a drunken madman, as history suggests. He was a man slowly losing his mind to an untreated disease, abandoned by a system that didn't know or didn't want to save him. Poe's death forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. How many mysteries exist simply because society refused to tell the truth? When we look back at these 5 men, it's tempting to reduce their endings to simple labels: madness, addiction, excess, or tragedy. But the truth is far more uncomfortable and far more important. These legends were not destroyed by moral failure. They were destroyed by silence. Syphilis did more than attack their bodies. It erased reputations, distorted legacies, and rewrote history itself. Because admitting illness, especially one tied to shame, was considered worse than letting brilliant minds collapse in public. Society chose gossip over diagnosis, judgment over compassion, and in doing so, it allowed a disease to quietly steal genius from the world. The real tragedy isn't just that these men died. It's that we misunderstood them while they were alive, and for decades after. Howard Hughes wasn't simply insane. Al Capone wasn't merely humbled by prison. John Barrymore didn't forget his lines because he lacked discipline. Oscar Wilde didn't fade because his wit failed him. Edgar Allan Poe didn't descend into chaos by choice. They were sick. and the world wasn't ready to say it out loud. There is a powerful lesson here, even today. Stigma still kills, silence still delays treatment, and history still prefers clean stories over complicated truths. When we hide illness, we don't preserve dignity, we destroy it. Telling these stories honestly doesn't tarnish their legacies. It restores their humanity. Because genius is not invincible, fame is not protection, and greatness does not make anyone immune to disease, shame, or neglect. If this video made you rethink what you thought you knew about history, if it challenged the way society labels brilliance, madness, and failure, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves history told honestly. Comment below. Which story shocked you the most, and which legend do you want us to uncover next? We'll continue exposing the truths history buried, because understanding the past isn't about tearing legends down, it's about finally telling their stories the way they deserve to be told.